USB controllers and USB devices have become part of our life with computers now, and so when we're working with virtual machines, we have to deal with this USB world because our USB ports are going to be on our physical host machine, and we're going to have to somehow turn on the USB functionality in our virtual machine. So let's talk about this in this video, and then I'm going to show you a couple of tricks on configuring these things out in Workstation. Now, to use USB devices and to use a smart card reader, a virtual machine must have a USB controller. And you may or may not see this thing by default when you create a virtual machine, so I'll take you through that in just a moment here. Now, the virtual machine must have a USB controller if a smart card reader is being used. Now, you may not even think of that about a USB controller and a smart card reader being related, but they are, regardless of whether your smart card reader is a USB device or not. So just keep that in mind. If you're using smart card, you need a USB controller because that's how it's being implemented in the virtual world. Now, Workstation provides a dual interface USB controller for each virtual machine. You can use USB 1.1, and that is the Universal Host Controller Interface, or UHCI for USB 1.1. Then there's the Enhanced Host Controller Interface, EHCI, for USB 2.0. Now, the host system must support the USB 2.0 because if the physical port's not 2.0, then you're not going to get those enhancements in the speed and all that. Now, USB 2.0 must also be enabled in Workstation, and I'm going to show you where to check that in just a couple of minutes. And 2.0 is only going to be available in Workstation 6 or later virtual machines. So you're going to have that hardware compatibility at 6 or later, and then you should be okay. Now, human interface devices, and we're talking about keyboards, mice, those kinds of things that are USB, will not appear in the removable devices menu by default. Now, there is a relationship here between your USB controller and whether it's showing everybody and that removable devices menu, and I'm going to demonstrate that in just a minute to make sure you don't leave you confused here. But if you just open a virtual machine, create it, and use it kind of out of the box, as they say, you will not see all of your USB devices in that removable devices menu. So you're going to have to go turn that on to make all of the human interface devices show up. And the reason we don't want them there by default is, for example, if I'm using an Apple keyboard here and I'm running Windows, in the boot camp environment, well, if I go in and take over the control of the keyboard in the virtual machine and take it away from the host, guess what? I'm not going to have it because it's all coming through the host. And so some of these human interface devices, we kind of want to leave it out of being tampered with more than we just have to. So to make these available to the virtual machine, I go into that virtual machine choice in the menu in Workstation, choose Settings. When I click on Add on the Hardware tab, right there, I can also just click on USB controller, and I won't even see the new hardware wizard, and I can still choose Show All USB Input Devices. It all depends on whether the controller has already been added or not. And so what I want to do now is jump out to Workstation and kind of show you how to move through these things and how it relates back to that removable devices menu. Okay, here we are in Workstation 8, and I want you to notice I've got my XP Professional machine. It is powered on already because I can't choose this to power it on, so it's up and running. And if I go into VM Removable Devices, one of the things you're not going to see here is anything about my keyboard, okay? I'm using an Apple keyboard here, but you don't see it. Why not? Well, if I go into Settings and then click on USB controller, notice I already have one present, so I don't have to click on Add here and add anything in here. It's already there. But if I just click on this, you'll notice over here I can choose to show USB input devices. It's grayed out because my machine is powered up and running. But then here's where I can turn it on to use USB 2.0 devices. So if my host system supports USB 2.0 and it has USB 2.0 ports, I can turn this on and I can get full USB 2.0 in my virtual machine. So to make these input devices show up, let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to cancel this out, go back here and remind you one more time, removable devices, you don't see a keyboard down here, and I am going to power off this machine. So I will power off the machine, then I will go out here into Settings, I'll click on USB controller, and notice now this is no longer grayed out. I can show all USB input devices, and now I will power on that virtual machine. It'll take it just a moment, but once it gets up here, notice I'm already seeing the Apple keyboard here. I'll click OK, and already if I go into the virtual machine menu item, look at removable devices, there is my keyboard right there. So that's a way to see everything, to turn it on, turn it off, and just wanted you to see these things about USB. It can be a little tricky if you haven't seen it, and I especially wanted you to understand the relationship between these settings right here in the USB and what shows up out here in the removable devices menu for each virtual machine.